Thank you for watching this video, and I'm really grateful because I belong to the very few people who try to make bridges between religions. You will find a lot of videos in YouTube where people try to attack the others, to defend themselves, and recently I watched such a video. It's about Islam and Christianity, and in that video there's a man called Walter Veith, by the way, a good friend of mine, a man that I really like, and another one called Shabazz from Iran, and they try to show that Islam comes from Catholicism. Very interesting affirmation, but the argumentation they have is so poor that I need to answer to that. So today we're not going to go into the classical comparative studies between Bible and Quran, but see what we do with people who try to criticize Islam and the Bible. So let's have a look at that video.
And Shabazz, from what I have studied on this issue, is that the Quran is very similar in its theology, or the attributes of Allah are very similar in their theology to what is presented by the Roman Catholic system.
So here we have somebody making an affirmation and someone who nods, who says, yes, that's like this. This man is an Iranian. So what does he know about Catholicism? I don't know. We'll see that in the following statements.
And therefore it is a reflection of Roman Catholicism.
Islam, a reflection of Roman Catholicism.
So in that sense, there is a link between this so-called Christianity.
There's not only a link, but Catholics is a so-called Christianity. As though Catholics are not Christians, yeah?
And the Quran.
Here, this is the problem, you see. We compare the Quran and Catholicism. So a religion with a book.
But is the God of Catholicism the same God as that of the Bible?
I'm completely speechless. Is the God of Catholicism the God of the Bible? I mean, if you ask 10 different Christians from different centuries, different places, different confessions, do they have the same idea of God? Of course you get 10 different answers. So it's not relevant what Catholics or Mormons or Protestants or Jehovah's Witnesses say about God. What is important as a scientist is to compare what the Bible says with what the Quran says. But we'll come back to that a little bit later on.
And here we have a link, because the people out there want to have the deities the same, that Allah really is just another name for the same God that we have in Christianity. No, he has this.
So here very clearly, Allah is not the same God as the God of Christianity. Again, we compare a name with a religion. Same problem. We come on to this later on.
No, he has the same attributes as the Catholic portrayal of God. But it doesn't have the attributes that are portrayed in the Bible.
Okay, now it's clearer. The God of Islam is similar to the God of Catholicism, but not similar to the God of the Bible. Okay, now we begin to understand what the point is.
And if we can look at some of the similarities, perhaps that would make it clearer, and you must please give your comments regarding this.
Okay, It means to explain that, we have to look at similarities. Which kind of similarities we don't know, but we will see.
Number one, the Quran denies the atonement.
The Quran denies the atonement. What is atonement? By the way, atonement is the word from the King James Version. Yeah, it's not necessarily in the Bible. And let's put the word salvation. Does the Quran really deny salvation? That's the question that this man, Professor Dr. Walter Veith, answers and says no.
Catholicism denies the atonement.
Catholicism does the same. So, Catholicism and Islam are similar. Now, I want to ask you a couple of questions. What about Buddhism, Hinduism? Do they have atonement? No, they don't. Can we say this is all the same religion? I mean, this is a little bit simplistic. On the other hand, can we say that all Catholics deny salvation by Jesus Christ? I think this is wrong to say that. There are many Catholics who are close to the Bible. In the same way, the Quran does speak about salvation, about atonement. The word for atonement, if you want, the word for redemption, let's put it like that, in the Quran is fada, fidya. This is the same word we have in the Bible, in Hebrew, fada. The Quran says that God redeemed the son of Abraham, wa fadainahu, Surah 37, Safad, verse 107. So there is redemption in the Quran. Here, I think that this professor goes too far in his statement.
Catholicism teaches that Christ never died for you.
Catholicism teaches us. What is Catholicism? There are so many branches of Catholicism, again. Too simplistic.
He brought the perfect sacrifice by obedience, but not for you. You have to pay your own sins in Catholicism, because you have to go to a place called purgatory where you pay for your own sins. Therefore, Christ in Catholicism is not the sin bearer. He's not the one who takes the penalty of sin, the wages of sin is death, upon himself. No, he was just obedient unto death, but he never took the penalty of sin upon himself in Catholicism. And therefore, Islam, when it teaches that there is no atonement, that is a charade, it's the exact same doctrine as Catholicism. That's a core doctrine. When it comes to issues like Mariology.
Okay, the second point is Mariology, the teaching about Mary in Islam and in Catholicism. Here, Professor Veith only tries to show that Mary is important in Islam as she is important in Catholicism. That's what he says. And the other gentleman who is on the video mentioned that there's a subway station, a metro station in Tehran called Mary. Okay, as a proof that Mary is so important in Islam. By the way, this gentleman, Shabazz, is from Iran. And Iranians are Shiites, so they don't represent the Sunni, the Islamic majority. That's one point. The second point is that even if somebody has a Muslim background, he doesn't mean that he knows Islam in its whole picture. You see, it's like I can teach any language except my mother tongue. Because my mother tongue, if you ask me why it's like that, I would say, why it's like that. But if I learn a new language, I can explain things according to what I've learned. And the third point is, I speak my language according to my region, to my dialect. It's not necessarily the mainstream language called French in my case. And that's why I question the capability of this Mr. Shabazz to be an authority in explaining us Islamic theology. So that's all we have about Mary. But frankly, this is really cherry picking, because Mary in the Quran is, for example, never the mediator as she is in Catholicism. Catholics pray to Mary or they pray to God through Mary. No Muslim has ever done that. That's something that is completely contradictory to the spirit of Islam and to the Quran. So to say that Mary is a common ground between Catholicism and Islam is complete nonsense. Allow me to say that.
The Quran elevates Mary above all the other women in the Quran, even putting her above Fatima. And then you have all of these connections. You have a place called Fatima in Catholicism, where Mary is the pivotal point. And I've been to the Middle East, where there are shrines where Islamic pilgrims come to communicate their wishes to Mary.
Of course, It's possible that some Muslims go to a shrine and pray to Mary. I don't know. But that's false Islam. That has nothing to do with the Quran. On the contrary, the Quran would condemn this kind of practices. We are talking about theology here. We are serious. We are talking about the Bible and the Quran. And that's what this man should do in his video. Not comparing some false Islam, some pagan customs who come into any religion in the world. This is not a common ground between religions. Well, the common ground is, yes, this paganism within religions, but it's not a theological common ground.
So this is very similar to what we have in Catholicism. So there's no atonement. And then the other thing is that Jesus is just a mere prophet in the Quran.
Now it comes. Jesus is only a prophet in the Quran. Is it really the same in Catholicism? Again, what do we compare here? What Muslims said about Jesus or what the Quran says about Jesus? What Catholics say about Jesus or what the Bible says about Jesus? And this is completely different. Yes, many Muslims believe that Jesus is just a prophet, but the Quran says his word coming from God, kalimatu minhu, his spirit coming from God, ruh minhu, his mercy coming from God, rahmatu minhu. Jesus is qal al-haq, the expression of God's character. His wajihan is glorious in this world and in the next. He's min muqaribina, he's close to God, and he's Rasulullah, the one that God has sent. He's more than a prophet. Muslims don't know that. That's a thing. But so what? By the way, I've recorded several videos on that topic. You can just watch them if you look at my playlist.
As Muhammad was a prophet in the Quran. And in Catholicism, Jesus is basically a created being because Catholic teaching says that he was generated by the Father. So that makes him a created being. So that would put him on the same level as everybody else, and he can be a prophet, but he cannot be what the Bible claims that he is. So as far as I am concerned, the God of Islam is the same, or let's put it this way, is the God with the same attributes as that of Catholicism.
And that's the last important point that Walter Veith brings to show the similarities between Islam and Catholicism. God's attributes. Now the question is, are God's attributes in the Quran the same like in Catholicism? We cannot compare that because if you ask 10 different Christians, they would have 10 different ideas of God. So what are we talking about? What we can compare and what we can only compare is the God as presented in the Quran and the God as revealed in the Bible. And the answer is very simple because in Islam, in the Quran, God has 99 names. All these names are in the Old Testament and in the New Testament. By the way, some Christians say that the God of Islam is not a God of love. Well, one of the names of God in the Quran is Al-Wadud, the God of love. Just for information, but again, you will find several videos on that topic in my playlist. So let's summarize the statement down here that Islam and Catholicism have the same origin are based on 4 assumptions. Point number 1, allegedly there is no salvation, no atonement in Islam. Again, let me answer by going back to the Quran and ask, is there salvation, is there redemption in the Quran? And the answer is yes. Many Muslims might not know that, like many Catholics may not know that the Bible speaks about redemption through Jesus Christ. But the word redemption in the Quran is the same like in the Bible. Fada in Arabic, fada in Hebrew. We have this word, for example, when God spared the life of the son of Abraham who should die. وَفَدَيْنَهُ, we ransomed him through a precious sacrifice. There is ransom here. There is redemption. Don't tell me there is nothing like that in Islam. The second evidence that is brought is the person of Mary, worship in Catholicism like in Islam. That's absolute ignorance to say that, because the Quran very clearly says we should not worship any human being, and Mary included. And I don't need to be a Wahhabi to say that. This is a basic creed of Islam. That some people may go to a shrine, to the house of Mary in Ephesus, for example, some Muslims, and pray to Mary. That's possible. That's folk Islam. We have nothing to do with that. But this is not something we can take as a scientific evidence of similarities between Islam and Catholicism in their origin. By the way, if we just stick to Catholicism, not even go to the Bible, a Catholic theologian will tell you that Catholics do not worship Mary, but they worship God through Mary. That's a big difference. Further on, this man, Mr. Shabazz, brings the fact that there's a metro station in Tehran called after Mary as a proof that Mary is super important. Well, why not? But don't forget that Jesus also was very important the time just after the Olympic Games 2024, after Jesus was ridiculized and blasphemed in the opening session. And then the Iranian government made a huge billboard on the highway in Tehran praising Jesus. So we cannot say that Mary is more praised than Jesus in Islam. By the way, here we're in Tehran. Again, this is Shiite Islam. It's not necessarily representative to Islam at general. The third point is the person of Jesus. Is the Jesus of the Catholic Church the same like the Jesus of Islam? Personally, I don't see any relationship. No. Jesus in Catholicism is often a baby, that's right, in the arms of Mary. Jesus is on the cross. Muslims will never accept that Jesus died, even though the Quran speaks about it. So where is the similarity? On the other hand, this video emphasizes that Catholics believe that Jesus has been begotten, and Islam denies vehemently that Jesus has been begotten. Islam, the Quran says very clearly, God has no wife, God has no son, he doesn't beget and is not begotten. That's a basic of Islam. So how can you pretend that this is a similarity between Catholicism and Islam? And the last evidence that is brought here is the name of Allah. I don't know why Allah should be a common ground between Catholicism and Islam. What I can only say is that Allah is not a pagan god. Allah is the name for God used by all Semitic Christians and Jews before Islam in Arabia, Aramean Christians, even Maltese Christians. In Aramaic, Jesus on the cross said, Elohi, my Elo. The linguistic difference between Allah in Arabic and Elo in Aramaic would be made the same as the difference between French restaurant and English restaurant. Same word, different pronunciations. Today, 30 million Arab-speaking Christians and Jews use the word Allah. Why do all Bible translations in Arabic use the word Allah for God? From the Codex Leonensis, the 10th century, just after Islam, until today, the Van Dyck, the Good News, and all the modern versions. They all use Allah. How can you tell me that's a pagan god? Well, this video says that Allah is the same like Allat. But the Quran itself, in chapter 59, Surah An-Naim, at verse 19, vehemently dissociate Allah from Allat. So if the Quran itself does it, do we have the right to associate both? I think that's not fair to do so. To conclude with, I am very disappointed that a man so distinguished like Professor Dr. Walter Veith, a friend of mine, a man with a capacity, and I can only recommend his videos on evolution, creationism, on the end time. Very good videos. But here on that topic, he seems to Xerox what he have heard from somebody else and brings an Iranian just to nod to show that what he says is true. But it's not scientific to compare things that you cannot compare. In that case, the practical side of a religion, and the book, in that case, Catholicism, Islam, Bible, Quran. Second, when this man says that there's no atonement in Islam, it's like flying for 1 hour to Egypt, drink a tea and come back and say, I was in Africa, I didn't see elephants at the airport, so there are no elephants in Africa. That's ridiculous. That's not scientific. A scientist can never say there's not such a thing. He can say, I didn't find such a thing, but not there's such a thing. Finally, I wonder, what does it bring to try to identify Islam and Catholicism? Does it help Muslims? Does it help Catholics coming back to their rule, Bible, Quran? I think it doesn't. Let's rather invite Catholics, Muslims, and everyone to go back to the roots and find the common ground, which is, in that case, the person of God, the person of Jesus, Mary if you want, but especially salvation. And that's why I wish you peace instead of sensationalism, differences, peace in God. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you for your attention, and don't forget to watch the videos that I posted on those specific topics.